I'd like to introduce Jack Hare, author of The Emperor Wears No Clothes.
Right.
The grassroots presidential candidate.
I would say
Got it. You gotta stand up, man.
thanks for all coming out in the middle of the week.
Sorry.
When I started working to legalize pot, and I didn't know anything else about pot other than you could smoke it. I thought it was a pretty good thing to do. I didn't start using marijuana until I was 30 years old. Before I learned any of the other information about pot, I was 30 years old, I had just gotten divorced, and my ex-wife had been smoking pot, and I said, "Why are you doing that? We got 3 kids." And she said, "Jack, it's a lot better than doing alcohol. You should take it up." I was sure she was just making this up to justify her ways. Well, here I was now divorced, was living in California. She was living in California. I lived in this huge apartment house with about 390 units. And I met this girl, she was 26 years old. And we started dating, we dated for a few weeks, and she said, "Jack," this is 1969, she said, "Did you ever smoke marijuana?" I said, no, I do alcohol and tobacco. She said, "Well, I mean, you really should do a little pot and loosen up a little bit because you're really uptight." So she got a joint. We tried it. I went, blew it out. Said, "No, it doesn't work on me." She said, "Okay." About 2 or 3 days later, she gave me another joint. I took one hit on it. I didn't even inhale it. Even though I inhaled tobacco, I didn't inhale the pot. Kind of like President Clinton. And nothing happened. I said, "It doesn't work on me." So she went out and she bought an ounce of something called Acapulco Gold. And she paid a huge fee for this Acapulco Gold. It was $20 an ounce in 1969. And by now I wasn't afraid of it, and I said, "Okay, I'll smoke it with you." And she rolled up 3 joints of the stuff that 2 hits would normally take care of it. And I didn't know, and we had already been lovers. So I smoked this joint. By the time half of it was gone, I didn't want to see any more of it because I was so stoned. You know how stoned you get when you first smoke? Everything turns to slow motion. And this is 1969, and she had some earphones for a stereo set, and she put them on my head. And we kept smoking this marijuana. She kept, "Here, take another hit." Take another hit. So she put these earphones on me, and I started hearing music. She had Bob Dylan, she had other things, and I could never understand what these guys were saying before, and now all of a sudden, the words were coming out so slowly that I could understand every word that was being said. And I was having great fun. I just never thought, I said, "This is the best music I've ever heard in my life." Everything I was listening to, I could see with my eyes closed, every instrument in the band, I could hear. I could see the notes floating out and going this way or that way. And then we smoked some more, we went into the bedroom, and we made love, except here I was 30 years old, and I had the foggiest idea that human beings could touch and hug and caress and love each other like we did that night. I did not know that human beings could feel this way and explore each other's emotions this way. I don't think I would have ever had a clue. I had never done an illegal drug. I had never done anything other than alcohol, which made me sloppy and stupid and couldn't remember the night before. And all of a sudden, every emotion, every part of myself was alive and feeling. And we made love for a few hours. And after we were done, we went into the kitchen. We went to the refrigerator. And I had the best munchies I'd ever had in my life. So the very first time that I allowed myself to get stoned and find out why my ex-wife was always telling me to get high instead of using alcohol and tobacco. I had heard the best music I'd ever experienced in my life. I'd had the best, the most loving, touching, feeling moments with another human being I'd ever had in my life up till then. And then I had the best munchies I'd ever had in my life. Over the next few years, I dealt a little pot in 1969, 1970, 71. And some friends of mine came up to me and they said, Jack, I want you to buy this. And they said, this is a number 9 weed. And I said, that's a number 6 after I smoked it. We got in this argument in the back of a paper bag in 1972. We made an agreement of how much you should pay for lids and pounds and kilos for every different grade of weed. And we just made it on the back of a paper bag while we were playing chess arguing about a dope deal. We put down 1 and 2 was real junk weed. There's another word for it, but I think there's a public place. 3 and 4 was real waste, terrible weed. Low grade Mexican or leaf. 5 was average weed, Mexican. 6 and 7 were above average. 8, 8 and a quarter, 8 and a half, 8 and 3/4. And the hemps, the marijuana started getting better. And then 9 and 1/8, 9 and a quarter, and so forth, up till 10. And when we wrote this thing down and we turned it into a little book. And the book became a bestseller in 1973. It was called GRASS, the Great Revolutionary American System for Assessing the Quality of Marijuana on a 1 to 10 scale for determining where you're at, what you have, and what to pay. And we sold it, became the bestseller in the underground market. We were selling like 35,000 copies a year. And we thought really this was all there was to pot. But after I'd written this book, a lot of kids, no older than you are right now, 18, 19, going to college, some of them, had asked me to join the California Marijuana Initiative. California has laws that you can change the law by putting an initiative on the ballot, and these kids are out to gather signatures to put marijuana on the ballot. And they're telling me, did you know, I mean, you wrote this book on pot, did you know that marijuana used to make paper? I said, come on, paper out of marijuana? How do you get paper out of marijuana? He said, oh yeah. Virtually all the paper in America and in the world was made from marijuana until about 1880. The first drafts of the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, were all written on marijuana. There were 14 copies of each one of those documents that were written on animal skin for the 13 states and the central government. But every other copy, including the one that was written on June 28th, 1776, and on July 2nd, 1776, and released to the Congress on July 4th, 1776, was made out of marijuana. The Declaration of Independence that you see signed was ordered, copied, and grossed on parchment, animal skin, and signed on August 3rd, 1776. So here I started learning about paper, that virtually every drop of paper on earth had been made from marijuana. I was really upset that I wasn't taught that in school. I was upset that 80% of everything that had been called paper for the last 1,000 years on earth had been made from marijuana, and not one person had bothered to ever tell me in all my public school, high school, or college. Then they said, did you know that they used to make clothes out of marijuana? That virtually every drop of clothes at the time of the Revolutionary War up until the 1850s was made from marijuana? I said, that they made rugs and drapes and curtains and sheets and pillowcases, all diapers were always made out of marijuana, because hemp, which is the real name of marijuana, hemp is 4 times more water absorbent than cotton. It's 4 times softer than cotton. It's 3 times the tensile strength of cotton. It lasts 26 times longer than cotton. Half of all the chemicals used on the planet Earth for farming are used on one crop, cotton. Cotton has so many enemies, so many bugs and weeds bother it, and boll weevils, that cotton uses half of all the chemicals used in American agriculture. Hemp has no enemies. Hemp grows the biggest and the best, and the fastest, in the most soil and climate conditions and latitudes of all the plants that grow on Earth. Of the 2.5 million plants or so that grow on our planet, the #1 growing plant on our Earth, the one that grows the most biomass in the least amount of time, the healthiest for the ground, was made illegal. I was really upset because I didn't have any of this knowledge from public school or high school or college. I just thought pot was something you smoked, you got high, and ate a lot. And they taught me that you could make every drop of fiber on the planet Earth out of hemp. And this is back in 1973 and 74. And then they taught me that you can make all the fuel to run our homes, our industries, and all of our transportation, our cars, our trucks, our planes. You can make every drop of fuel out of hemp. You can turn it into charcoal, just like they do mesquite in Missouri. Turn it into charcoal through pyrolysis. Turn that into methane, make methanol, and even catalyze it back into gasoline, just like you get from the ground. The cracking process for petroleum and coal was invented from the cracking process of natural farm products. We were cracking farm products 30 years before we learned that we could crack oil and coal the same way into all the different elements that would shoot off at different levels of the heating process of the material. And that hemp would make all of the fuel to run the earth, and then all the other plants on earth, all the switchgrass, all the bamboo, all the sugarcane combined couldn't even equal 2, 3, 4% if you did nothing but grow that for fuel. And there would be no food left on earth. Now, I just wanted to smoke this stuff. But in 1973 and 4, when I found that out, I felt cheated. I felt that I should have known this when I went to public school. I should have known this from the time I was in first grade. That the #1 plant on earth for fuel, and that could make all the fuel on earth using a fraction of the land, and all the other plants on earth combined couldn't do this, and that plant was made illegal. And the information was taken out of your education. They don't teach it to you in your public schools. At least they didn't when I went to public school. They don't teach it to you in high school, and they don't teach it to college. Unless you come to an event like this, it was pretty hard to find out that hemp is the #1 paper source on Earth, that you never have to cut down another tree, the #1 fiber source on Earth, and the #1 fuel source on Earth, and the easiest to get to. It took 200 hours to harvest and break 1 acre of hemp for 10,000 years up until about 1930, when machinery was built by International Harvester that brought it down from 200 man-hours to harvest and break an acre to less than an hour, from a $200 hamburger to a $1 hamburger. That's a lot of difference. Now, it made me mad to find out that this information was available through the Department of Agriculture, through all our archives, that our books and Bibles and maps have been printed on this. I didn't know that the word canvas was the Dutch pronunciation of cannabis. Canvas sales were cannabis sales, marijuana sales. That all the ships from the Mayflower to the ones that came over with Columbus, to the War of 1812, to the 1880s, all those sales on all those ships were 100% marijuana. And had never been anything else, as well as the ropes, and the flags, and the books, and the Bibles, and the maps, and the logs. And the sealants on the ships were always 100% oakum, made from 100% marijuana. When they would take the fibers of the rope apart, that sticky rope resins in the middle, which don't have any THC, they would use as a plastic so water wouldn't come into the ship. How many of you have seen Western movies with covered wagons going west? But how many of you have ever thought, when you looked at those covered wagons, that all those covered wagons were marijuana-covered wagons? They were all hemp-covered wagons. They were all cannabis-covered wagons. There was no other material for it. For people to grow up and go into their jobs and their education and to never know this information, for the government to put stops on your education so it's not taught in school, so you don't even know to ask these questions, to me was like one of the things that really upset me about this information in 1973 and 4. Originally, all I wanted to do was see pot legal so I could smoke it without being a criminal. But when I found out about the paper, fiber, and fuel, I thought I'd go out and teach a few people. And I figured I'd go out and tell Normal and High Times magazine and tell the National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws and the lawyers in those organizations all about the advantages of hemp. And when I told them, they said, we're not interested. We don't care about it. And I said, you're kidding. He said, no, people are just using it for smoke. Nobody wants to wear it. Well, I wanted to wear it. I wanted to try it at least. I got old books that were made out of hemp and Bibles, and I showed it to them, and they wouldn't write anything or talk about it. For almost 15 years, I fought with High Times and Normal Organization, and finally in the middle 80s, they began to cave in. In 88, High Times declared the hemp information and went and put in magazine after magazine after magazine on hemp and on the work I had done. And then Normal finally gave in. They said, okay, I guess we can make clothing out of it. Now it's the biggest part of the movement is the hemp movement within the marijuana movement. But I just wanted people to know the information. They had outlawed the #1 plant for paper, fiber, fuel, and then I found out it was the #1 protein and food source on Earth, and the #1 food eaten on Earth until this century. That more people ate hemp seed than any other food on Earth. In fact, birds, there were tens of millions of acres growing wild in America, and the birds feasted on the hemp seed. They chose to eat hemp seed before they would eat any other food on Earth. No matter what seeds you put down, all the hemp seeds will be gone before they'll move on. If you put them down, of all the different seeds, all the hemp seeds will be eaten before a bird goes on to eat any other seed. And the hemp seed makes them the healthiest. They live about 10 to 20% longer, so do human beings, if they eat hemp seeds. Hemp seeds is the highest in usable protein, what's called Ediston protein. Hemp seed is the highest in usable protein of any food on the planet Earth. It's the highest in linolenic and linoleic and gamma-linolenic acid. I couldn't pronounce those words when I first pronounced them. Linolenic, linoleic, and gamma-linolenic acid are the acids that dissolve all the plaque or cholesterol in our arteries. 6 out of 10 of us are going to die from plaque in our arteries, and the one way to stop it is to eat hemp seed morning, noon, and night. A little bit, a teaspoon in the morning, a teaspoon in the afternoon, and a teaspoon in the night, and it'll dissolve all that plaque from all the fats and steaks and meats you eat and the hydrogenated vegetable oils. And then, besides being the best for your arteries, it's the number one thing for the immune system. It gives you the highest immune system, and no puns intended, of any food on the planet Earth. Paper, fiber, fuel, the number one in each one of those categories, greater than all the others, the number one food, the number one protein, the number one vegetable oil for cooking, for putting on salads, is a seed that we have forgotten about. That was our number one food that was legal in this country until 1937. You might wonder how they outlawed marijuana. Blacks and Mexicans were the only people that smoked marijuana in this country, and when they smoked it, they would step on white people's shadows. Doesn't sound like a big crime to you, but under the Jim Crow laws of 1910, 20, 30, 40, and 50 in the United States, if a black person or a Mexican stepped on a white person's shadows, the police or that man was obligated to arrest that man for stepping on a white person's shadow. And he had to do 10 days jail time under the Jim Crow laws in America for stepping on a white person's shadow, for making eye contact with a white person, for looking in a white person's eye for 3 or more seconds was jail time. And when they were stoned, they would forget. They forget that they couldn't look a white man in the eye or step on his shadow. And then, for looking at a white woman twice, 5,000 blacks were hung without benefit of a trial, lynched between 1885 and 1915. 5,000 black men were hung in this country for looking at a white woman twice. No white man was ever brought to trial for this. This is the kind of laws that you have on the books. Hemp was the number one paper, fiber, fuel, food, medicine. The number one medicine in America and in the world until 1863 in America and until well into this century in the rest of the world was hemp, was smoking hemp or eating liquefied hemp. It was our number one medicine for asthma. Have any of you guys got asthma? You ever had an attack with... Yeah, there's some nods, there's some heads there. I have 2 children that had severe life-threatening asthma. And the best medicine for about 80% of the people with asthma is to give them a hit on a joint.
I got asthma, Doug. I have asthma, Doug.
You live 6 to 12 years longer than using the legal theophylline medicines that are legal to use. It was the number one medicine. It dilates your bronchial. It opens them up so you can breathe. And on the first hit, you get relief. I took my son to the hospital approximately 20 times by 1973 when he was 9 years old. And when I found this out from one of the young kids at the hemp movement, the marijuana movement, I went ahead and I gave him some pot with his. And that was the last time he ever had an asthma attack. My daughter, when she was 9, 10 years old, was having asthma attacks a few years ago. And I gave her hemp, marijuana. And she didn't want it in any way, shape, or form. But I gave it to her, and she stopped having her asthma attacks. She didn't have to walk around blowing that the cartridge in their mouth all the time. A lot of you people, and there's police here, so I guess I might as well, a lot of you people might wonder, well, what about, okay, so it's good for paper fiber fuel food, medicine for chemotherapy, for asthma, glaucoma. Glaucoma, 2 million Americans suffer from glaucoma. It's like getting a sharp stick in the eye and your vision goes all in all. But when you smoke marijuana, your vision never leaves. Your vision never gets worse. It's by far the best medicine for glaucoma. 2 million Americans with it. 14% of all the blindness in America comes from glaucoma. And the best medicine by far is to smoke pot. And only 3 Americans have a prescription to do it legally, so millions do it illegally. For asthma, glaucoma, chemotherapy, when you're vomiting, they've given you poison, so you're poisoning the whole system. You can't eat. And the best medicine you can take when you're getting this chemotherapy is to smoke pot, so you don't vomit, so you can eat, and it gives you an appetite to eat. You got your best chance of survival, but it's illegal. The government gives you a synthetic pot at $600 a hit. And they give you synthetic THC that costs $600, and it makes you so crazy you thought you did 1,000 joints of pot in 5 minutes. The best medicine in the world for chemotherapy for most people is to smoke a joint. Nobody has ever died from smoking a joint. In the long history of mankind and in medicine, nobody has ever died. Francis Young, the chief judge of the Drug Enforcement Agency, wrote in 1988 that marijuana was the safest therapeutically active substance known to mankind. A lot of you are wondering, I don't know how many of you drive. How many of you guys drive? Okay. You don't have to answer all these questions if you don't want to. There's police around. And you're a fairly young crowd here. But I'm not encouraging any of you to do this, but just listen to it. How many of you have ever driven straight, totally straight, and had an accident? Did you raise your hands? There's about 25% of you. How many of you may have driven under the influence of alcohol and have had an accident? About 15% of the hands. How many of you know people that have driven under the influence of alcohol and have had an accident? How many of you people know people, including yourself, that have driven under the influence of just marijuana and had an accident? I've asked this question of thousands of people in colleges at a time, and usually we get maybe 1 or 2 or 3 hands at the most up that have had accidents under the influence of pot. But there is some downside to it. If you're driving straight and you're on the freeway and you go to miss your freeway and you're totally straight, you usually go, holy cow, get over there! And you cut off 3 cars and get off. But if you're driving stoned and you go to miss your freeway exit, you generally go, whoa. And you get off the next exit and stop at the Burger King. You drive safer. By every statistic and every scientific study that the government has done from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, Motor Trend, Car and Driver have all tested this out. You drive safer under the influence of marijuana, but you miss your freeway exits more often. And you live longer if you smoke pot every day of your life than people that do no drugs whatsoever. You live 8 to 24 years longer than people that use alcohol and tobacco regularly. You got to be out of your mind to follow the government. But there's one thing you've got to do. You've got to register to vote. A lot of you, I don't know how old you guys are. Most of the time I'm speaking to college students or above. But when you're 18, you've got to go and register. Your opinion doesn't count in America, nor should it count unless you vote, unless you participate in the system. And then you can vote the ignorant and the bums out, because once you teach this information to somebody, it's okay that they went along all their life believing marijuana was an evil drug or it did something terrible. But once you teach them it's on paper, fiber, fuel, food, protein, nobody has ever died from it except at the hands of the government and at the hands of police. Then it's time for you to take control of your own universe. But then you have another thing. You need to teach everybody around you the information. You got to teach them that hemp is the #1 source of paper, fiber, and fuel. No more trees ever have to be cut down. No more poisons ever put down on cotton crops. No more fuel that'll go up the atmosphere and cause a greenhouse effect. You'll make everything you burn when you burn hemp for fuel comes out again next year when the farmer grows it. The earth is back in balance. And no other plant you can plant, no other group of plants, no more thousands of different plants equals this one plant. And this plant is illegal. 300,000 Americans are in jail or prison right now for something to do with hemp. In any sane society, based on the information you had, we'd congratulate them and reward them for growing hemp. That a person who deals you hemp is a much better person than a person that refuses you hemp. You live longer if you smoke pot than people that do no drugs at all. So you can only feel good, you can live longer. You don't need to be so aggressive in life. You might wonder, if this is all true, why you weren't taught in school. I went to the Smithsonian. I asked the guy at the Smithsonian, the curator of the Smithsonian, a lady, and then I asked this guy who was he's the director of the Smithsonian. I said, why don't you put down that the sails, the ropes, the flags, the books, the Bibles, the covered wagons, the clothing were all made from marijuana in your 1700 and early 1800 exhibits? And he said, there's no reason for people to know. He said there's no reason for children to know. It just confuses them. Here on the outside of the Smithsonian in Washington, it says, we keep all the information and all the knowledge so that it is not lost in future generations. But the Monsanto, the Gulf, the DuPont oil, the DuPonts, all they give to the Smithsonian, and I don't think they want the competition. And I don't think anybody realized the competition. I ask you to keep this information as the Earth's #1 paper, fiber, fuel source. Read on hemp. Go to your dictionaries. Go to your encyclopedias. Read all about hemp. Write your papers on it. Register to vote. Vote people that'll vote more along with you. Even if there might not be something to vote for, there might be something to vote against. And I'll tell you, if you can get all your friends to vote, the average age of a voter in America is 54 years old. The average age of overall voters is about 37. I ask you all to join with me in voting. So, one of the things that I want you to know is that you can change the world right now. But you have to get up and get involved in teaching the information. The Wall Street Journal, Pulp and Paper Magazine. This is a great paper state. Pulp and Paper Magazine 2 years ago declared hemp the only way to make paper and to make all the paper on Earth out of hemp without ever cutting down another tree. Our trees are only 4% as old on Earth as they were 100 years ago. We're only breathing 4% of the oxygen and holding the carbon dioxide, 4% of it in the ground. If we let the trees grow, the earth will be saved. I think so. And so does every other scientist I've run into. There's nothing that you have to fear except the ignorance and the fear of being afraid of the government or the police coming down on you for your beliefs. But if your beliefs are rooted in fact, nobody can touch you, because the fact is they're not your enemies. They're just citizens like yourself that are just learning about this information like yourself. Teach this hemp information to everyone. And I'll open up the floor and I'll take some of your questions now. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody would like to ask anything about pot, or what it does, or what are the effects?
Anything!
No. I take part in the study at UCLA. I smoke pot for the government. I've been smoking it since 1981. UCLA has a funded study since 1969 on pot. They have never found a single human being in America or any place else in the world, including the Rastafarians in Jamaica, who smoke more marijuana in a day than the average American who does smoke smokes in 3 months. They smoke them by the cigarfuls, and they smoke them all day long. And that they've never had a single human being that's had lung cancer from marijuana. 450,000 got it from tobacco. Basically, you get it from tobacco because tobacco is the most radioactive substance known to mankind. It has so many. Here's a Reader's Digest article from 1986 telling you why people get cancer from tobacco. It's because it's the heaviest. It says radioactive footprints. How did radioactive elements get into cigarettes? T.C. So, a former researcher at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, tracked these radioactive footprints to the fields where tobacco is grown. For many decades, farmers have fertilized tobacco crops with phosphates rich in uranium. Now, they didn't know this consciously. They did it by accident, but they did it so long ago, they got us used to smoking their type of tobacco. With phosphates rich in uranium, by decay, this uranium generates radium-226, which in turn spawns radon-222 and eventually lead-210 and plutonium-210. And this is readily absorbed by the tobacco. None of this goes into marijuana. There's never been, 450,000 Americans will die this year from lung cancer associated with marijuana. Not a single human being, as far as we know, will die from smoking pot from lung cancer if he just smoked pot. So I think you're a lot better off. And the studies that they've done so far suggest that people that smoke pot and use tobacco have a little bit better percentage than people that smoke just the tobacco by itself. And it might be the reason is you cough so heartily when you're coughing up the pot that you break loose this radioactive elements from the different passageways that they branch out, your air passageways where they branch out in your lung, that you may cough these ingredients loose. Pot is the safest therapeutically active substance known to mankind. The only laws that are against marijuana were anti-Negro, anti-Mexican laws, and that's what the police still enforce from the 1930s till now, are just like enforcing Jim Crow laws on us. That you, by accident, a lot of you are probably outlaws or partial outlaws of your families because you've come down here today because many of you may have smoked marijuana. But as far as we can tell, you live longer, better, and healthier if you smoke pot every day. And you don't have any incidents of cancer that they've been able to find so far. Yes? It's legal to, right now, it's not legal to grow hemp in the United States. So we're importing from China and from Hungary. My jacket is made of 100% hemp. My vest is made of 100% hemp except for the trim, and my shoes are made from hemp, from Hungarian hemp. And that hemp was legalized 9 weeks ago in Great Britain. In England, you can grow hemp for paper, fiber, or fuel as of about 9 weeks ago. You do need a permit yet. France has been growing its paper from hemp for cigarette paper and Bible paper, is now expanding for full clothing lines out of hemp. My book is a bestseller in France. I'm going to France next month for the International Marijuana Hemp Day in Paris, and I'm supposed to be the keynote speaker there. Germany has found this out. All throughout Russia, they're replanting hemp. Through Kazakhstan, countries that used to be part of Russia, hemp is becoming a large crop again. And it's because Americans are demanding it. We can't get enough hemp in America to meet our demand. There's about 100 stores that have started up in the last year. They're hemp stores exclusively, and we're having a hard time keeping them full because we can't grow the #1 crop for fiber in America, as well as paper and fuel. There's no more reason to cut down any more trees, except if you want to have planetary death. It really is that serious, and pot is that much fun by comparison to tobacco and alcohol. Say that again?
When you burn marijuana for fuel, do you get, is everybody going to become stoned then?
You mean from the fumes?
Yeah.
Now what they do is they take it and charcoalize it like they do mesquite wood. They would charcoalize it. And the charcoalizing, you burn it with the absence of air, basically with just a touch of air. And when you burn it, it would go up the pipes and you would turn it into methane, methanol, or turn it back into gasoline. And that's what you would burn. There's no THC in it. There's no high in it. You know, the #1 medicine in the world for asthma, glaucoma, chemotherapy, multiple sclerosis, anorexia, and a lot of people's migraines has been outlawed. I mean, I know a lot of you probably have just used marijuana experimentally, but you should start thinking about teaching people all this information. Enjoy it. It's a lot better to use pot, in my opinion, than to use alcohol or tobacco. And the only reason it's got a ridiculous price on it, that it isn't damn near free, is because the government and the legislators have put these ignorant laws, and they're ignorant because if they knew all this information, if all your parents knew all this information, that was told to them by people that they would have to believe, and the Vice President of the United States knows this information, there'll be a committee that'll study hemp sometime in the next 6 months, and in about a year they'll come forth with their recommendations for paper fiber fuel, and if we keep pushing, before another year or 2 or 3 are out, all the marijuana laws will be gone. All the people, in my opinion, everybody that's been busted for marijuana will get out of jail. And if I had my way, and I hope to have my way in California, where we're going to be running an initiative starting in December to be on the November 94 ballot, where people get back their property or the value of their property that's been seized from them. They'll get back their education where their degrees have been taken away or nullified by government. That the future is that we will have a world where we can make paper fiber fuel, and that everybody that's ever been busted gets out of jail, somehow gets remunerated or some way compensated through tax ways to get all their life back, because they did nothing more than save the seed that's going to save our planet. and all the other seeds on earth and all the other plants on earth, if you came up here and talked about sugarcane or knuff or any other product, you could take and talk about all the other plants on earth and they wouldn't equal this one plant. And this plant has been taken away from us. And our friends and neighbors and associates have been put in jail for something that in any sane society they would congratulate you for doing in comparison with alcohol and tobacco. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What do you think about Dare?
Dare? I'll tell you, last year I was up in Minnesota. I was running, they had me on the presidential ballot up there. And there was this young girl, she was 11 years old. And she stood up, she was the daughter of one of the organizers, and she put a challenge to the police officers there. She called it double dare. She double dared Dare to refute the claims that I had made about the information. She double dared them to come out with their death threats and prove them or show any statistics that verified their side. This little 11-year-old girl stood up there in front of everybody and double dared Dare and all their officers to come forth and debate. And we've offered the debate to Dare officers all over the country. We have not had one except to debate the issue. They would rather see people die than a human being get high. And then to find out that makes all the paper, fiber, and fuel in the world, they just don't have anything to say to that. Too dangerous. Who died from it? Nobody died from it. Nobody's ever died from it, except at the hands of you, the police officers, acting. But don't blame it on the police. Blame it on the politicians. They're the ones that pass these laws. They're the ones that keep the laws on the books. And they're the bums that need to be voted out. And you've got to register and vote. But let me tell you, when you register to vote, once you register, you've got the world back in your control. You might not win right now, but you can grow and grow in groups to where you will grow and where you will win these elections. And it's best to start right now to help change the world and get 300,000 people out of jail, 1.5 million off probation and parole. 14 million Americans have been busted for something we should be congratulated for. Certainly Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were great hemp farmers. Thomas Jefferson invented the hemp brake that we had in America for 50 years, the ¡1 hemp brake in use throughout America, when hemp was the largest crop in America. I don't think anybody here would have ever thought about putting George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, or Ben Franklin, who started America's first paper mill with hemp. The facts, the history, the documentation, the Wall Street Journal, Open Paper Magazine, the LA Times in the last few weeks has run this information on the front page. The San Francisco Chronicle, the New York Times ran it, Time Magazine ran it, all the last month, that hemp is the #1 plant on our planet. So, did I bring the message to Waukesha? That I ask you to go out and teach it to your fellow friends and students and teachers and parents. And the way to teach somebody is over and 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 over again until they get it. Because as long as they don't get it, they're betting on planetary death, and I'm betting on planetary life. You haven't done anything wrong by smoking pot to yourself or to society. Except, as I said before, and I'm guilty of, the munchies. Anybody else got a question? Anybody else would like to ask something? In a few minutes you're going to hear, I guess, more of the band. And all of you are welcome to come up to me and ask any other questions you want to ask in public or you want to hear. We're here to teach and show you these things. We've come here, you've had I never thought we'd ever do one in Waukesha. I've been doing Madison, Wisconsin. Anybody been here to Madison?
Yeah, last year.
Well, we'll be there in Madison in September. Are you going to the Harvest Fest next week? Or 3 weeks? The last week, it's about 30 miles outside of Madison. We'll go and have a good time and a safe old time. And I ask all of you to remember to teach this information. This information won't get in through osmosis. You can't believe because somebody smokes pot, he knows it. You've got to go out and teach people all this information. This is the information on wheat stock I've been just given. It's May 28th to 31st, Memorial Day weekend. It's near Mount Horeb, Horeb, Wisconsin, 20 miles west of Madison on US 18 and 151. Look for signs in Mount Horeb for the Tyrol Basin ski area. Follow signs and find wheat stock directly across the way from the Tyrol Basin ski area. So, and that man in the masked man over there is the man who will have some more of these to hand out. So, if you don't have any more questions, remember, if you just learned about paper and fiber and fuel, that hemp isn't just paper, fiber, and fuel. It's by far the Earth's #1 source of paper, fiber, and fuel, greater than all the other annuals on Earth combined, and the one plant that's capable of saving the Earth and reversing the greenhouse effect, and this is against the law. The one plant that can reverse the greenhouse effect, make all the fuel without ever burning another drop of fossil fuel, this plant is against the law. This plant that grows the biggest and the best on the planet Earth, and by the way, it's the only plant that goes down 10 feet with its roots when it's raised for fiber, and you plant them 1, 2, 3 inches apart, goes down 10 feet and brings up the nutrients from down in the ground. It grows great during droughts and grows great during wet seasons because of its deep root. It brings up the nutrients from these corn fields that have got all these chemicals on top, and the top 2 feet have been leached of all their nutrients. Hemp is the one way to bring it back, the single healthiest plant on Earth for all it touches and all the plants that come afterwards, for all the farm crops come afterward. You've got to help me change the laws. Thank you, folks.